So this is chapter 1, an introduction to anatomy and physiology. So you want to follow along with your guided notes and take notes as we go. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the difference between anatomy and physiology. So anatomy is the form of the body, or structurally what it entails and what it looks like. So we have two kinds, gross or macroscopic. So gross is, as opposed to fine, like if you're talking about fine motor skills or gross motor skills, the gross ones or macroscopic have larger structures that you can see. Your skin, your organs, bones, things like that. So those are what we call gross anatomy. And then the microscopic is obviously things that you need a microscope in order to see. And those would be more like cells or the layers of skin, or what the ligament looks like microscopically. So those would be that. And then the physiology is the study of the function of the anatomical component. So if we're talking about skin as the anatomical portion, what is the physiological portion of skin? What is the function of skin? Is to protect our insides. It's to keep it's waterproof so that we don't melt when we're outside in the rain. It's different parts of your skin have more layers to keep up with the mechanical and chemical stress that's put on it every day. So that is the function of the skin, and the anatomical component would be what kinds of cells it's made out of, and what does it look like, and what color is it, and how thin or thick it is. So that's the difference between those two, anatomy and physiology. So if we're talking about the heart, for example, this right here, this picture would be what an anatomist would study, the actual structure of the heart and the ventricles and the atriums, and where the blood is going. And then the physiologist would be studying what the heart is doing and how it's performing. So they would look at the timing and sequence of the heartbeats. Is there a murmur? Is it skipping? What is the blood pressure? Is there a blockage? How are the valves opening and closing? And so all of this information here, all this type of data is what a physiologist would look like. So the anatomist is more concerned with the structure of it, and the physiologist is more concerned with the function and how well the heart is functioning. Most of the nice thing about this is that form and function are usually related. So if you're talking about the elbow, your elbow, it's this bone being connected to here, and it acts like a hinge. So it's circular in this component here so that it can slide nicely in this receptor, which is also circular. So just like it's kind of comparing it to like a hinge on a door, how we have that cylinder in there that is easily able to move and doesn't hit blockages, right? So the same thing about your bones here in your hip, your knee, your elbow, your finger joints. They all have this type of shape where the ball fits nicely into the socket. And then this fascia here, this is to prevent rubbing, and this makes it smooth. So people sometimes need hip replacements when the fascia is all gone and the bones are essentially rubbing on the other bone. It's very painful. So this is structural organization, and we're starting with the smallest level down here, and then we graduate up until the biggest level, which is the organism. So for chemical level, we're talking about atoms forming molecules, molecules then being able to get together and form a single cell. So then we have the cellular level here. So a type of cell, like an epithelial cell or a connective tissue, like a fat cell or adipose cell. And then when you have a bunch of cells together, grouped together for one common goal, you have a tissue. So tissue is a bunch of the same types of cells that all are there in order to do one common function. All right, so like a ligament would be to connect, a muscle to a bone, like that's its function, right? But it's made up of smaller cells, the tissue is. So then we have sometimes multiple tissues form together. And when they form together to create one type of, to have another overall function, we call this an organ. So an organ is typically composed of multiple types of tissues, more than one type of tissue. will form an organ, and this organ has an overall function as well. So this would be like a kidney, your stomach, your brain, uterus, a bone. A bone is an organ. Okay, so that's the organ level. And then when you have a bunch of organs together that are all working together for one common goal or purpose, then you have an organ system. So this is what we're going to talk about next, is the organ system. And we have 11 in our body. And so, for example, the digestive system is composed of your esophagus and your stomach and your small intestine, your large intestine. And all of those organs work together for one common purpose, which is to digest food and absorb water and nutrients in order for us to stay alive. We have lots of organs. We have 11. We'll talk about those next. And then all of your organ systems together work for one common goal, is to keep your organism alive. So in our case, we are the organism. People, the person, is the organism. And we are composed of organ systems, which are composed of multiple organs, which are composed of multiple types of tissues together, which is composed of one type of cell. And then broken down further, we have molecules and then atoms. So this is just a picture of it. Here's the atoms forming the molecules. Molecules form the cell, smooth muscle. A bunch of smooth muscle cells get together and they form a tissue. So this is tissue, a smooth muscle tissue. And then in this organ, we have multiple. So here we see we have epithelial tissue, which lines the inside of this tube. Then we have the smooth muscle tissue here, which is going to move whatever's in this tubule down. And then we have the connective tissue here on top of it. So we have 3 layers of tissues that creates this one organ. So it looks like this organ right here. See, it says it's a blood vessel. So this is a blood vessel. And its purpose is to move blood. So the smooth muscle tissue will contract to push the blood through. Then the blood vessel is part of an organ system, part of the cardiovascular system, which is composed of heart and blood vessels. So these are everything color-coded here as part of the organ system level. And then all together creates your organism. So we have the cardiovascular system plus the digestive and the endocrine and skeletal, and all of those systems together create the person. So we have 4 different types of tissues. Within those 4 main categories, there's lots of types of tissues, but there's 4 main categories of tissues. The first one is epithelial, and it's the most common. And your skin is an example of epithelial, and it forms barriers over body surfaces, both internal and external. So these are the types of cells that are going to line passageways and chambers. So within your digestive tract, it's lined with epithelial. Your lungs are lined with epithelial cells. Your small intestine, your large intestine, the fallopian tubes, the vas deferens, they're all lined with epithelial tissues. Okay. The second type is a connective tissue. There's lots of types of connective tissues, and sometimes they don't feel like they all have a common thread, but they do. But they have a lot of functions actually, and they fill internal spaces. So our internal spaces are filled. We have bone. So osseous tissue right here is bone. So this is a cross section of a piece of bone right there. So bone is a connective tissue, and then we have cartilage, what your nose and your ear is made out of. There's cartilage, that's a connective tissue. Blood fills your internal space as well. Blood is a connective tissue made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, things like that. And then we have other types of connective tissue, areolar, adipose. Adipose is a fancy name to say fat layers. So all the fat cells in your hypodermis underneath your layers of skin, that is a type of connective tissue. And then fibrous connective tissue as well, like tendons and ligaments. These types of tissues also store energy. So the fat stores energy, provides structural support. So that's your bone, your cartilage, the ligaments and tendons. And so all these are different types of connective tissues here. Okay. The next type is the muscle tissue. There's 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal. This is the one that you can make bigger by exercising, right? Push-ups or sit-ups or any kind of exercise. These are the ones that you have control over as well. Skeletal muscles you have control over. The cardiac muscle and the smooth muscle, you have no control over those types of muscles. You can't control how fast your heart beats or how slow it is. You have no control over that. Your brain, your autonomic system that just does it to keep you alive. And then the smooth muscle is the type of muscle cell that keeps things moving within your body, within your digestive tract, within your blood vessels. You want that to be happening all the time. So those are the three types. Skeletal, cardiac, and smooth are the only three types of muscle tissue. And then we have neural tissue. So that's the fourth of the main types of tissue categories. So if they're in your nervous system, central and peripheral, and they carry information from one place in the body to another. And they are made up of neurons and neuroglial cells, which we'll talk more about later. These are the supporting cells for the neurons. They help to nourish and protect the neuron here. So these are the two main types of cells in neural tissue, neuroglial cells and neurons. So all those types of tissues can fit into sometimes multiple organ systems. So the first one we have is integumentary. We'll talk in depth about this one. And this is what protects us from the environment. So it's your skin, your hair, and your nails. And the other really important thing it does is it controls your body temperature, because your skin is in charge of sweating. If you get too hot, then you sweat to release heat. So integumentary, hair, skin, and nails, and also regulates your body temperature. So that's really important. Skeletal, right? Our bones are also used to store minerals like calcium. So it protects soft tissues, forms the blood cells in your bones, inside your bone marrow. It's your skeletal. Muscular locomotion is to move, support, and it produces heat. So when you're outside and it's cold, what do? You move, right? You run in place or you do some jumping jacks, and that motion gets you to produce heat. Your nervous system, this is all about responses to stimuli and what happens to them, and it coordinates a lot of the activities for all the other organ systems, so a very important one. Endocrine is hormones, so that's going to include the pancreas, the thyroid, the adrenal gland, and the pituitary gland. So your pancreas is in your abdomen, and then your thyroid is up near your neck, and then your adrenal and pituitary glands are in your brain, and they are really responsible for a lot of regulation for your homeostatic component in your body, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Then we have cardiovascular, which is your blood and heart. Lymphatic, defense against infection and disease. So you have lymph tissue as well. It's like this is like your immune system here. T cells and B cells. So you have blood vessels. You also have lymph vessels that circulate and provide protection against viruses and bacteria and other types of infections or diseases. Respiratory, delivery of air, right, in your lungs so that your blood can be oxygenated. Digestive, food and absorption of nutrients, minerals, vitamins, and water. We all pretty familiar with this one. And then your urinary, getting rid of the excess waste, and it also controls the pH as well, so that needs to be at a certain level. And then your reproductive one, reproduction of sex cells, so that would be sperm and ovaries. And then you'll also have reproductive hormones as well. Testosterone, estrogen, things like that. So those are the 11 organ systems. And then there's just a picture here kind of showing you where it would be. So this is showing you your skin and your hair, skeletal, muscular, nervous system, endocrine, right? Here's your kidneys, thyroid, glands, cardiovascular with the blood vessels, lymphatic. So you have blood vessels, you also have lymph vessels, and they're connected to lymph nodes. Respiratory system, your lungs. Digestive system here also includes the esophagus. Urinary system also has the kidneys in it as well, and then the tubes down to your bladder, and then your reproductive system, female and male. Okay, so next thing is homeostasis. So how do we keep all of our body working properly and in balance? So the balance is really the big part we're looking at here. So homeostasis is all about regulating the maintenance of your internal environment in your body, because we can see externally different factors, right? If we're pale or we're really red, we can see that part of our skin, but a lot of the internal factors we can't see. So our body has to regulate them for us because we can't see if there's something wrong. So homeo means to unchange, and stasis means to stay the same, like standing. So we're trying to keep it standing at an unchanging, just kind of even keel process in our body. So we have to maintain homeostasis in order to survive. And if our body cannot maintain homeostasis for a certain amount of time, if it gets out of whack, then that's when we can end up dying. So homeostasis is very important. Illness and or death can occur if homeostasis cannot be maintained. True. Organ systems work together in order to maintain this homeostasis, and we'll talk about that in the next couple slides. For example, we all eat foods that contain the sugar glucose. So glucose is a type of sugar. It's found in your blood. And when you have that, your body has to use it, process it. And then if you have too much of it, it's going to store it for a later use, because sometimes you ingest more sugar than your body needs. Some people who have diabetes do not have a way to process the glucose in your body through the production of insulin. If they don't produce insulin, then you can't use the glucose. So when your glucose levels get too high, the pancreas releases a hormone known as insulin. So insulin is a hormone and it's secreted by the pancreas, and it stores the extra glucose for later, and it stores it as glycogen. So it's going to store it later as glycogen in the liver when you have too much of it. And then if you don't have enough glucose in your blood, then your liver can release it, will transfer it back from glycogen into glucose for your body to use for energy. So this is what happens in a body that is homeostatic. This is kind of what we do every time we eat something. The glucose gets processed by the insulin that's released from the pancreas, and then extra is stored in the liver. So here's our normal glucose, and then if the glucose increases, then the pancreas is the affector, and it has these receptors, and it's like, oh, we've got too much glucose. We need to produce more insulin. So then it tells the pancreas is going to produce more insulin, and then the liver is going to take any extra glucose and turn it into glycogen, because we don't want to have too much. So if we have extra glucose, then it gets turned into glycogen and then stored in our liver, and then it goes back to normal. But then if you go down here and you don't have enough glucose, right? You haven't eaten sugar in a long time and it's too low, then your pancreas receptors are going to say, okay, liver, time for you to release that glycogen back into glucose. And so let's put some glucose into the bloodstream because we need some energy right now. And then when that happens, then we have a normal amount of glucose. When there's a breakdown in this, right, when the pancreas receptors can't create more insulin, that's when we have a problem. So that's what diabetes is all about, is that the pancreas, the receptors can't produce insulin. So you have to put insulin into your body after you eat something that has glucose in it, in order for this homeostatic process to be able to continue. So usually this homeostasis, it's not just like a flat line. Oh, it has to be this number. Usually there's a range. So for example, your blood CO2 level is between 23 and 29 milliequivalent units per liter of blood. So as long as it's in that range, then it's fine. When it gets below 23 or above 29 for a period of time, then that's when you can have some issue. So what needs to be regulated in your body besides insulin and CO2 is your temperature, right? We have to stay at a certain temperature range in order for us to be healthy. Your blood pressure, your blood pH. So your blood pH has to be at a 7.4, right around 7.4. And any kind of drastic going away or higher or lower than that can really complicate things. Oxygen and CO2 concentration in your blood, osmoregulation, how much water you have in you, and then blood glucose. So those are the things that need to be regulated by homeostasis in your body. So they go through that whole pattern of up and down until we get it regulated again. So here's just a picture kind of showing you what it is. So here's like the stimulus, the imbalance, like we have too much glucose, right? So the imbalance is we have too much glucose. So then our pancreas is the receptor, and the pancreas is going to say, okay, what are we going to do now? And it's going to give this message to the brain. So the control center is going to be the brain, and the brain is going to say to the pancreas, go ahead and make more insulin. And then if we have too much glucose, then the effector, the liver, you are going to absorb some of that, and you're going to turn it into glycogen, and you're going to store it. And then once that happens, then we're back to being balanced. Another way to look at it, the stimulus. What is the stimulus that tells your body something's wrong? So for example, if your body temperature exceeds 37 degrees Celsius, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, so this is the normal body temperature. If your body temperature goes higher than that, then sensors like nerve cells with endings in the skin and the brain are going to say it's too hot. And it's going to say to your brain, we need to regulate some temperature and to do something to get that temperature back down. And then it's going to tell the sweat glands in your skin to sweat and release the temperature, release the extra heat in the form of sweat. And then that happens, and then your body temperature is regulated again until it gets hotter than 37 degrees Celsius, and then it will start all over again. So this is called a negative feedback loop. So when you have too much of one thing, you're going to go into the opposite way. So you're going to go to the negative. So if you have a positive thing happening, then the negative is going to go the other way. So whatever is you're having too much of it, your control center is going to say, we need to do something to get it back down. We need to do the opposite of what the stimulus is. Okay, we need to do opposite. So negative feedback, that's what we've been talking about. It's going to, the negative feedback, the control center is going to oppose the original stimulus. You're too hot. Okay, we need to make it cooler. You're too hot. We need to make it cooler. Okay, or you're too cold. We need to heat up. You're too cold. We need to heat up. So it's going to do the opposite of whatever the stimulus is telling your body. It's going to do the opposite. So this is an example using like a thermostat in your house. So everyone sets their thermostat to a specific temperature. So let's say this is 68 degrees. But then this is like what in my house, we have the window, kids are running in and out of the doors. The window gets open by accident. And then all of a sudden the temperature of the room is higher than 68 because it's warm outside. So then this registers it as high, right? So the room temperature rises above normal. Now it's up to 69. So then the thermostat is going to detect the change that it's too high. It's going to tell the control center that it needs to turn back on to get it to cool down. And then the effector is that the heater is going to turn off and the air conditioner is going to turn on, and it's going to turn it back on to put more cold air into the house. And then it goes back towards the set point that you originally set it for. So when it was too hot, the negative feedback was, okay, we need to make it colder, right? So it's the opposite effect. Or same thing, if it got too cold, then it would say, okay, we need to turn the heat on to make it hotter. So it's just doing the opposite thing that it was supposed to do to correct the measure. So that's negative feedback. And then the other one is called positive feedback. So the positive feedback is something that is kind of like an extraordinary situation, does not happen every day. I should go back and say negative feedback is something that's happening all the time. So you have constantly negative feedback, homeostasis processes going on in your body all the time, daily, just to keep everything regulated. So negative feedback is a normal part of your day inside your body. Positive feedback is not. Positive feedback is for something that is out of the ordinary and really is kind of almost like an emergency situation here. So instead of opposing the feedback or whatever the stimulus is, it's going to enhance it rather than opposing it. Okay, so it's going to enhance it. So it's whatever the response is, it's positively going to give more feedback. Okay, keep going, keep going, keep going. All right. So like I said, not a daily occurrence. It's usually in a response to an extreme something happening extremely strange. So an example is you cut yourself, right? And so your blood vessel threatens severe blood loss. Your body doesn't want that to happen. So instead of taking blood away from it, it's going to accelerate and enhance and send more blood to that spot, and more blood is going to have more platelets in it, and the platelets will be able to clot at the spot and then stop the bleeding. So you will make more platelets. So when that happens, your body says, okay, there's a cut. I need all those cells in there. We need to release more platelets, and it exaggerates the platelet making, and it sends more platelets to that spot to help clot immediately. The other example is when someone's in labor, when you're having a baby. Your cervix is kind of the opening from the uterus down into the vaginal canal, to the birth canal. And you need the cervix to dilate or open up. So when the head of the baby is pushing on the cervix, it's going to send a signal to your body that, hey, we've got to secrete this hormone that's going to open up the cervix to get this out. And then we're going to have this contraction that's going to be severely, like, keep contracting, like keep getting those uterine muscles to get that baby out. So it's going to enhance the stimulus that the baby is ready to come out, and it's going to like dilate that cervix, and it's going to, those contractions are there to be the positive feedback loop and push the baby out. So here's here's a picture of it. So we've got the head of the baby is going to push against the cervix, right? So here's the cervix right here. So this part has to open up in order for the baby to fit through this canal right here and come out, okay? So in order for that to happen, the nerve impulse from the cervix is going to be transmitted to the woman's brain, okay? Woman's brain up here. And then the brain is going to stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called oxytocin. And then oxytocin is going to be carried in the bloodstream down to the uterus. So this pink thing right here, this is the uterus. It's a giant muscle. And then the oxytocin is going to stimulate uterine contractions and push the baby towards the cervix. So this muscle right here is going to contract and push the baby this way. It's going to open up the cervix, and it's going to push the baby. So those contractions that you hear are so like hurt so much, it's like this big cramp that you're getting. This muscle is literally pushing, doing its job to try and push this baby out this smaller opening here. So that's why it's kind of painful. So that's a positive feedback. And again, an extreme response, right? Having a baby does not happen every day. And also cutting yourself doesn't happen every day. So there's the cutting one, right? There's a break or a tear in a blood vessel. Feedback cycle is initiated. Clotting occurs as platelets adhere to the site. The platelets are going to release these chemicals. And then the clotting proceeds until break is sealed by newly formed clot, right? And then, it's going to release chemicals to attract. So these chemicals that it releases attract more platelets. Say, come on over here and help me. And then it's going to continue on until it's all has that clot there to prevent any more blood from leaking out. So again, this is positive feedback. And that's the end of section 1 for Anatomy and Physiology, chapter 1.